Well, good morning, and thank you for having us here again. It is wonderful to be back with you. It's been a long time since me and my family were here, and we are all pleased to be back. So thank you for welcoming us. Well, let me begin by asking the question to you, where are we going? What is it that we're looking for? As we think about our lives day to day, our lives month by month, our lives year by year, our lives amongst the generations of history, as we look at all human lives in all history, where are we going? What are we working for? What are we chasing after? Where are we going? Well, if you talk to the secularists, they will tell you their various opinions. Some will say humanity is headed for extinction, to make room for the next species to take over the earth. Some of them would even say this is a good thing. But this is decidedly an evolutionary worldview, and no doubt one that I disagree with. Some secularists will say that we're headed for a great technological reformation, where people will be embodied into robots, our consciousness uploaded into computers. And by this, we will escape the decay of our mortal bodies and attain technological immortality. And in case you're wondering, yes, this is a real dream amongst some people, with millions of dollars being put to this kind of research. Some secularists will say that humanity, however well we do on Earth, are eventually destined to leave Earth in an inhabitable state. That we will be like a civilization that has used up the resources of its home planet, leaving little breath of life in it, and that we will leave here to colonize other planets, presumably to repeat the same consumer process. And it's not difficult to find numerous modern movies that exemplify each of these ideas. Although the movies that touch on human extinction, they all seem loath to actually go there. They always seem to leave with a glimmer of hope that humanity will go on and rise again somehow. Nonetheless, these are the secularist views of where we are going. And all of these views share common threads of escaping corruption, either through extinction, or through technological innovation, or by relocating to other pastures in the cosmos. In none of these ideas is there any sense of renewal of the present life, but only of the demise of life as we presently know it. And for that reason, the secularist views are by nature defeatist views. But really, who can blame them? Who can blame them for holding such views if all we have is the ingenuity of humanity on the one hand, and the imperfection of human character and morality on the other hand? Then in this light, the secularist views actually make sense. If all we have is humanity, then I don't think any of us would come up with any destiny different to what the humanists have suggested. They have summed up the capabilities of humanity well. We are inadequate in and of ourselves to renew and reconfigure this earth and our life on it. But there is another thread that the secularist views have in common. They all make a prediction based on humans being the only or primary input into the equation. In their worldview, humanity is the only driver, the only actor, the only influencer. In short, all of these views are godless. No matter how reasonable they may seem, no matter how much they follow some sort of data, they are profoundly wrong because they have left out a critical constant in the equation. That constant is God. Humanity is not here by accident. We are here because the Lord God decided it to be so, and He made it so. And we are here because the Lord God has a plan and a purpose far bigger than any of our individual lives, and He began working that plan before the beginning. Humanity is not the only player in the equation. The secularist puts humans as the most important actor, humans as the key player, and because of this error in their starting point, their final conclusions about where humanity is ultimately headed, they are profoundly inaccurate. Humans are not the key player, God is. It is His creation we are living in, and we are part of His creation. It is not ours, nor is creation the result of a mindless, purposeless cosmic accident. Creation is not an orphan, nor is it drifting aimlessly along. It has a maker who owns it, and he has a plan for it, and he has never ceased to own it, nor to be sovereign over it. Humanity is not the mover and shaker of history. God is. And we know this most profoundly by looking at the cross of Christ. It is the most profound interjection, the most profound act of God in the history of the world. And it truly was an act of God. No human decided the cross should be. No human council got together to make it happen. There was no human driver to make it a reality. Oh, humans were involved, but as pieces on a chessboard. The driving was done by God and God alone. The cross was his idea. It was his to execute, and no one can take credit for the cross of Christ but God himself. And on the cross, God said that the trajectory of humanity was not eternally acceptable nor permissible. On the cross, God sealed a covenant and drew us in, a covenant that would forever change the destiny of humanity and of the world and indeed of all creation. Through the cross, Paul declares that all things, whether in heaven or on earth, whether things visible or invisible, all things have been set on a path of reconciliation with God. Colossians 1:19-20, I read, "For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in Christ, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross." It is through the blood of Christ, shed on the cross, that God's plan of redemption and reconciliation, not just for people, but for all things, that all are to be restored and reconciled to him who made them. That is the correct conclusion of all things. It is ultimately a destiny of peace, of reconciliation, of unification. Because God is the central player in earth's destiny. And the cross of Christ is his central point of action. On the cross, God shouted to all creation as if through a megaphone, "What humans do is not the final say in the destiny of all things. It is what I say that decides the ultimate outcome, and I have decided, and I have put into action the greatest and most forceful plan of redemption the cosmos has and will ever witness. There is no need for plan B, for what I decide will stand." In the words of God, through Isaiah the prophet, we see in different situations the supremacy and all-sufficiency of God to carry out whatever he decides. For example, Isaiah 43 verses 12 and 13. The Lord says, "I have revealed and saved and proclaimed, I, and not some foreign god among you. You are my witnesses, declares the Lord, that I am God. Yes, and from ancient days I am he. No one can deliver out of my hand. When I act, who can reverse it?" Or consider Isaiah 14, verse 24. The Lord Almighty has sworn. He says, "Surely as I have planned, so it will be. And as I have purposed, so it will happen." You see, friends, the cross tells us emphatically, beyond any shadow of doubt, that we are not the primary players on earth, but God is. The cross tells us, as if a guarantee from God, that he is not an idle observer of humanity's effects on the world, but that he is the shaper and the destiny of humanity and of all creation. And so the secularist views, no matter how reasonable they might be in light of some of the facts, the subset of the facts that they look at, their conclusions are still missing the greatest and most influential fact of all, that God is the master of creation. Some of them miss this fact deliberately. They don't want it to be so. Others miss it ignorantly. They are unwittingly wrapped up in the secularist worldview and simply have not seriously considered the God question. But God is Lord and Master of the universe, and he has decided its destiny, and he will not rest until it is fulfilled. And he will ensure it is done, despite our temporary inadequacies, despite our temporary ignorance of his position as Lord and Master. He will see that it is done. Neither you nor I nor governments, nor the secularist nor humanist, nor the powers of darkness can shake earth's destiny away from what God has firmly decided. We may shape the minute details of how we get there, but the wisdom of God still triumphs, and his outcomes will prevail. And in that, we are to take great solace, but also great motivation to move forward and advance God's purposes in partnership with him. It is not a fruitless cause, but quite the opposite, a most fruitful task to join with God in advancing his purposes. With that introduction, I would like to outline this sermon and the next couple. This sermon will be the first of a series, and at this stage there are 3 sermons planned in the series, but I do suspect more will likely be needed. I'm honoured to be preaching here again, twice in November, and those 2 sermons will build on this one. This sermon today will be about the glories to come, what God has said about the glories to come, the destiny of the earth. In our next time together, we will consider how we get there. What is the journey there looking like? And in our third sermon, we will take a dive into some well-known prophetic scriptures and consider briefly the power of the new covenant that we now stand in as it relates to the destiny of the earth. In each of these sermons, my ambition, my intention, is to encourage and equip the saints. To encourage us, that is, to bring the light of God's plans into our hearts. And to equip us, that is, to clarify God's calls of action. So that is where we're heading, and I thank you for the privilege of being able to go through all of this with you. It's been a blessing for me as I've put these sermons together, and because of God's goodness, I trust it will be a blessing to you too. And so on we march. Having considered the inadequacies of the secular worldview regarding the ultimate future, let us now turn our attention to what God, the mover and shaker of history, to what he has declared about the glories to come. What God says about the future is exciting news. God is unchanging and true to his nature. The destiny that he has decided for earth and creation is one befitting of him, one that reflects his nature, not the nature of defeatism, destruction, or extinction. So I call this first sermon, The Glories to Come. Consider these 2 scriptures. Isaiah 11, verse 9. The earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. And Habakkuk 2, verse 14. For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. Now, did you notice that both of these scriptures speak in future tense? They do not say the earth is presently filled with the knowledge of God's glory, but that it will be. They are looking ahead to the ultimate future. Now, when an ancient person writes of knowledge, as Isaiah and Habakkuk have done, they do not mean intellectually grasping certain facts. They do not mean head consent or understanding a theory as if you could just read it in a book. Knowledge in the truest and ancient sense is experiential awareness. Experiential awareness. When Adam knew Eve in Genesis, it does not mean Adam read an information pamphlet on Eve. No, Adam got to experience Eve in a very special way, and thus Adam knew Eve. True knowledge is an experienced reality. It is understanding gained through experience, and even today, with our imbalanced emphasis on theory and facts, we nonetheless still think of knowledge at times in its truest form in terms of experience. Think, for example, of driving a car. You can read all the books you want about driving a car, but you cannot actually say that you know how to drive a car until you get behind the wheel yourself, until you feel and experience what it's like to control the steering, the acceleration, the braking, the traffic, and all the aspects of driving that you encounter on real roads. True knowledge is grounded in personal experience. And deep knowledge requires deep experience. It is through the Hebrew prophets that God says the knowledge, that is the experienced reality of God, that it will fill, future tense, fill the earth. Whilst these verses speak about the future, there is a similar verse that does speak about the present time. So let's have a look at that one now for comparison. Isaiah chapter 6, verses 1 to 4, and I read, In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord high and exalted, seated on a throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him were seraphim, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces, with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying. And they were calling to one another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. At the sound of their voices, the doorposts and the thresholds shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. Here Isaiah listens, as great spiritual beings in heaven cry out that the earth is full of God's glory. That's what they can see. From their perspective, looking in the spiritual realm at the earth, when they look here, they see that the earth is presently full of God's glory. Here we are distinguishing the spiritual dimension and the physical dimension. And in the spiritual dimension, where Isaiah is looking, in that dimension, they see the earth as full of God's glory. But to us, who are not having a vision like Isaiah's, the spiritual dimension is veiled. Our primary experience is not grounded in the spiritual plane of existence, but in the physical plane. We accept and believe that the spiritual realm is real, but our senses are not tuned there like the angels are. Our senses are most in tune with the physical world. So you ask any person walking in the physical realm, you ask them whether they see God's glory filling everything through their non-spiritual vantage point, and the answer is undoubtedly no. Believer or non-believer, it doesn't matter. The veiling of the spiritual realm is a present human condition. We do not see instinctively that the earth is full of God's glory. We may accept it doctrinally, but we do so as a statement of faith. Faith being the key word there, because we don't see it, not like they do. We need to be told that it is true, like we are told in Isaiah's vision. We do not instinctively see the glory of God filling the earth. But these seraphim, from their perspective in the spiritual dimension, they see it plain as day. In fact, it is so profound to them that it is one of 2 things they spend time shouting and declaring in heaven, the other being the holiness of God. That the earth is full of God's glory is perfectly clear to them, not a shadow of a doubt. But to you and I, we do not see it that way from the physical realm. It is not our experience of life in this physical dimension. Which is why God's promise through Isaiah and Habakkuk is so important. That the earth is full of God's glory, yes, but it is not full of the experience or the knowledge of his glory. It is veiled, but a change is coming. What needs to change is not where God's glory is, but the knowledge of his glory. Earth will be filled with this experience. God's glory will be known and felt everywhere, such that we would join with the seraphim and initiate that declaration with them. The earth is full of God's glory. How much will the earth be filled with this experience? How pervasive will this knowledge be? As much as the waters cover the sea. So a question, how much do the waters cover the sea? Not how much water covers the earth, but how much does the water cover the sea? The answer is, of course, 100%. That is how much the knowledge of God will be across the earth. That is how much his glory will be the personal experience of every individual. It will be everywhere. Nowhere will be exempt. Nowhere will be without. And in no place will the experience of the presence and nature of God be ambiguous or doubted or accepted by faith, because it will be accepted and known from full and constant and unrelenting experience, day and night. Whether you sit, whether you rise, whether you go, whether you come, his glory will be your permanent home. So what is the glory of God? This is a question worth asking. In its simplest terms, the glory of God is the nature of God. It is the characteristics of God, his majesty, his purity, his love, his wisdom. All of this and more will be experienced by us constantly, everywhere. These qualities of God, felt and known by every being across the face of the earth. It will be so. It will be so. It is like, as Paul says in 1 Corinthians 13, verse 12, "For now we see dimly, as in a poor quality mirror. But then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part. Then I shall know fully, even as I have been fully known." Isn't this wonderful? Isn't this something worth hoping in? Isn't this something worth spending your days looking forward to and your energies investing in? But there is more in these verses. Go back to the analogy used by the prophets, the waters covering the sea. You cannot have a sea without it being covered by water. It is truly a strange statement. It's part of the definition of a sea. A sea, by definition, is a large place that is covered with water. That's why the analogy is so ironic. As the waters cover the sea, well, of course, that's what the sea is. In the same way, the knowledge of the glory of God will not simply be everywhere, it will define everywhere, just as the waters covering something defines a sea. God's glory will be the defining statement, the defining reality about every place. It is what will shape the nature, the experience of every creature, everywhere. What we are seeing here, wrapped up in these two verses, this single promise of the pervasive knowledge of God's glory, what we are seeing here is a fully renewed creation. Renewed. And what anchors its renewal, what defines its renewal, is the pervasive experience of God's nature redefining all things. This is why Scripture goes on to describe the coming condition of the earth in the following ways. Because the experience of God's glory will be the defining characteristic of life everywhere. Life will be very, very different. Earlier we read part of Isaiah 11 verse 9, the promise that God's glory would fill the earth. Let's now read the larger passage, the full passage, to see what God describes about that condition on the earth when his glory is pervasively experienced. Isaiah 11 verses 6 to 9. I read, "The wolf will live with the lamb, the leopard will lie down with the goat, the calf and the lion and the yearling together, and a little child will lead them. The cow will feed with the bear, and their young will lie down together. The lion will eat straw like the ox. The infant will play near the cobra's den, and the young child will put its hand into the viper's nest. They will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountain." Why? "For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea." Here God describes for us a very different kind of world. One where carnivorous animals are not carnivorous anymore. All animals will be at peace with other animals, even the lion will eat grass. This harkens back to the world before the curse came, the world before humanity sinned, before the stewards of creation had fallen, before evil became part of the experience of all things. There at the beginning of creation, Genesis chapter 1 verses 29 and 30. Then God said, "I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth, and all the birds in the sky, and all the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food." And it was so. You see, in the beginning, every creature was vegetarian. Now, for some of us who love a good steak, it might be hard to appreciate the beauty of such a world. But think about this. A world without carnivory means a world characterized by peace at every level. Wolves and lambs together, children and vipers together. I think I would trade in my steak to go and play with lions, to ride rhinos and to play with lemurs. Wouldn't you? God declares of the animal kingdom in that coming era. Isaiah 11:9, "They will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountain." God's holy mountain here is a poetic way of referring to the place where God's reign is, which will be everywhere. So why will no creature harm or destroy on earth? It all comes back to that one defining reality. For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. The constant, pervasive experience of God, even by the animal kingdom, will rewrite the behavior, the instincts, the desires of every creature. Isn't this something worth longing for? This is not fairy tales, folks. This is God's promise, His declaration. But the change goes further. It is deeper than simply whether animals attack each other. The change will also be in the connection and the consciousness between people like you and me, on the one hand, and between the animal kingdom, on the other hand. There will be such a deep connection and awareness that Isaiah writes in verse 6, he writes, "The wolf will live with the lamb, the leopard will lie down with the goat, the calf and the lion and the yearling together, and here is our key phrase, and a little child will lead them." Animalia will be responsive, connected with people. Not only can a child be safely amongst them, but a child will lead them. Isn't that amazing? Animals will peacefully follow the leading of even a child. How many animals respond to our leading today? Dogs, mostly. Horses, sometimes. Cats, no. Cats don't at all. I look forward to the renewed form of a cat. Seriously. But very occasionally other animals can be trained to follow people's lead, like elephants or tigers, if they're well trained. But for those undomesticated animals, the wild animals, for them to follow a person, they need to be around people from when they're young and trained intensely in that way. But in all this, we have a glimpse today of what Isaiah is saying, but it's only a glimpse. Isaiah is saying that animals, wild animals, they will not actually be wild per se, but they will be sensitive and peaceful to the leading of even children. There will be a deep awareness, an effortless connection between animals and people. And again, the beauty of this is that we see this is an undoing of the effects of evil on the world. You see, animals were not always afraid of people. There are certain points in history that are markers or turning points for life everywhere, for the whole planet. The fall in Genesis 3 that we looked at, that is one of those markers, one of those turning points. But there is another one regarding the animal kingdom, and it was in the flood of Noah's day. Because immediately after the flood is when God said that people can now eat meat. Again, does that mean that I'm thankful for living after the flood? Well, I'm not sure, but I do like my meat. But there's something else that changed at this time. Something far bigger that changed at the time of the flood. In Genesis chapter 9, verses 1 to 3, immediately after the flood, we read the following. Then God blessed Noah and his sons, saying to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number, and fill the earth. The fear and the dread of you will fall on all the beasts of the earth, and on all the birds of the sky, on every creature that moves along the ground, and on all the fish in the sea. They are given into your hands. Everything that lives and moves about will be food for you. Just as I gave you the green plants, I now give you everything." You see, folks, from creation to the flood, the relationship between people and animals was not one of fear or threats, but one of companionship. But since the flood, what we see here in Genesis 9, since the flood, God declared that the relationship between people and animalia would be one of dominion and fear, one of hunter and hunted. This is the world that we know today, a world where animals instinctively see people as a threat, and therefore they run from us or attack us. This is the world that we know. But for some 1,500 years before the flood, it was not like this. How do you think Noah managed to get all the animals on the ark and manage them on the ark? It was because animals and people related very differently to how it happens today. And the flood was the turning point in history for that. But God declares there will be another turning point in history where that change will be reversed. If you can believe the history given in the Bible of the world before the flood and then the flood, then you can believe the future given in the Bible as well. Isaiah encourages us with the confident assurance that there are profound glories to come. And Isaiah grounds all of this in one particular coming reality, because the knowledge of God, the experienced reality of the glory of God, it will permeate everything and be the defining characteristic, the defining experience of all things, even of the entire animal kingdom. Now, whilst a great deal more can be said about the glories to come, there is just one more aspect I would like to highlight for us today, one that is deeply exciting, and we will see it in Isaiah chapter 2, verse 4. It reads, "He, that is God will judge between the nations and will settle disputes for many peoples. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take sword up against nation, nor will they train for war any more." This prophecy, again, speaks of a remarkably different world to what we know today. One where nations will not settle their disagreements with armed conflict, nor with less than subtle military threats or military exercises. The US and China and Russia will not be funneling billions of dollars into their defense budgets to keep bolstering their militaries. The 85 or so countries that have mandatory military service will no longer require that of their peoples. Weapons manufacturing will shut down. Those factories will turn to producing goods that bless humanity and promote life and wellness. It will be a very different world. Military training and military careers will be a thing of the past, things which one would only be able to discover by reading the history books. That is the world to come. Interestingly, Isaiah is not describing a world with no disagreements between peoples or nations, but a world where the standard approach for settling disagreements will be vastly different. Human methods, governmental intervention, diplomatic agreements, they will not be the go-to source for peace. What Isaiah describes as the standard approach, it will be, let's inquire of God and see what he says about this. He will settle this dispute for us in a way that is fair and good. Did you hear that? Did you hear what Isaiah describes about the world to come? I would like us to note the emphasis here. We're not talking about two individuals seeking God to resolve a matter between them, but whole nations, whole people groups. This will be the done thing, the standard practice, the normal way of life at large. In fact, this method of conflict resolution will be so securely established, so workable and successful, that militaries will be deemed as useless, obsolete. It will actually be safe for a nation to say, let's just do away with the military entirely. It is now a waste of money. Let us not even bother to train people for war. It is a waste of time and energy and money. That is the world that the Lord describes for us. There won't be a remnant to retain some form of military knowledge and know-how just in case. The knowledge of war and weaponry, the knowledge of battle strategy, they will happily pass into the pages of history. They will be seen as empty and pointless, a relic of the past, because of the sheer reliability of going directly to God at a national level. Dismantling the national military will not be considered as a risky venture to promote goodwill, but it will be seen as a rational course of action because of the tangible, experiential presence of God. For the knowledge of the glory of the Lord will fill the earth as the waters cover the sea. The constant, pervasive experience of God is what will redefine the behavior of people everywhere. Now that is good and wonderful, but this is what is particularly exciting, I find. What we are witnessing in this verse is a time when the veil between the spiritual and the physical realms is so thin or even completely removed. The spiritual realm will not be an invisible, inexperienced reality, but the very presence of God and the fullness of his nature. They will be so tangible, like that felt by the seraphim, that we cannot help but exclaim that his glory is truly everywhere. It will be simple for nations to say, "Let's inquire of God." It will be simple, easy, reliable. Just as the nature of God will be tangibly felt by people, people themselves will interact with God in a manner that is just as tangible, just as concrete, just as definite. It will not be done by faith anymore, but by living, tangible experience. You see, faith is always intended to be temporary until the things in which we are trusting become the tangible, experienced reality. At that point, faith is no longer needed. What we are talking about here is a level of awareness of God and interaction with God that is unparalleled with today. And it will be so widespread, so palpable, that the idea of it necessarily whets our appetites for all that God has planned. And all of this reveals the heart of God. It reveals the heart of God, the love of God, that this is the destiny that he would voluntarily set for the world. So let us now close by pulling all this together into an application. An application. You see, God is not content for our awareness of him to remain clouded and subtle as it is today. God is not content for humanity to be left to its own best efforts. Even secularists rightly recognize that our best efforts are simply not enough. God is not content for creation to remain frustrated by the curse of evil, such as the animal kingdom being bound to instinctive fear and carnivory. God is not content with these things, which is why he has set a destiny for the earth that answers these problems. But the complete answer to all of this is the fullness of God himself, being seen and felt by not just the seraphim and the angels around his throne anymore, but by every living creature across the face of the earth. The veil between the physical and the spiritual realms removed, the unification of heaven and earth being tangible and unrelenting. Isn't this a glorious picture? It is glorious, and it is so because God is so. The foundational reality of all the glories to come is the glory of God himself. That is the underlying reality. His glory is both the reason and the cause for the world to come. It does all come back to the glory of God. That is the remedy in its fullness. God's glory is the remedy, but we do not see the fullness of it yet. But the beginning of this remedy has already happened. It is the cross. It is in the cross of God that God began saving people for himself, calling people out of the kingdom of darkness and into the kingdom of light. It is through the cross that God calls his people to begin the practice of being indwelt by him. And through the indwelling of the Spirit, we begin to see the glories to come, and we have hope. But let me ask you, this transformation that is to happen, this glorious transformation that we have spent this sermon considering, when and where is that supposed to begin? Where and when is the glory of God to start manifesting and becoming our defining experience? Do not say it is when Christ comes. Do not say it is at the last day, so to speak. For Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 3:18, and this is our verse of application. He writes, "And we all, who with unveiled faces behold or contemplate the Lord's glory, we are being transformed into his image with ever increasing glory, which comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit." Transformation. Having considered God's glorious destiny for the world, we should be brought to a confident, expectant hope of what's to come. But if hope is the only consequence, then we've missed part of the reason for the cross. God has put his Spirit in you so his glory can begin manifesting with you. He wants to begin manifesting with you. As you look at your life until now, and as you look at the person next to you, and all that you've heard of the Christian life, as you look at these things, do not conclude that they define the goal. Do not conclude that there is nothing more to be gained, even in this life. God has not put a limit on how much you and I can know him, experience him, and manifest him. He intends to be glorified through all creation, and he is beginning with the people that he has saved, you and I. The reality of the cross is not the end point for us. It is just the beginning of all the glories to come. It's the invitation to a journey to see it all come to pass and to have it heralded through us, the people of God. So the call is to press into him, to keep growing in him. I said it before and I'll say it again. The Lord has not put a limit. He has not put a limit on how much you can know him, experience him, and manifest his glory. Any limitation there is on our side, not his. To know that God has begun this work of transformation, and he calls us to press into him such that the transformation in our lives might maximize more and more. It all began with the cross, and it's supposed to be increasingly seen in you and I today. As we move into the next sermon next time, we will consider more of this and what this journey to the glories to come looks like. But for now, let's pray.